he told me that he kind of didn't mean to. He sort of got into engineering, and folks there looked like they were a little bit burned out, and IT looked like it was a little bit more of a happy place. So he wound up in IT security, and well, there's a smile that looks genuine. It does, doesn't it, folks? I'd say. Now, I asked him, how long you been in information security proper? And we figured, what was it, about 5, 6 years, something like that? Like, focused?
Yeah.
So what would be your advice for yourself if you could, like, you know, in a sentence or two, tweet-wise? You can tweet to yourself when you're starting out.
Yeah.
And
I
what
hope this is working.
Yeah?
I think it's working. I would say take it easy. Because in the early parts of the career, especially in this industry, I found you have a lot of support and you have a lot of time to learn, go deep dive on certain areas like memory analysis, malware analysis. And being a junior gives you that space. But as you get more senior, you have to guide people and train other people. And there is a skill shortage. And it's, I mean, we love the work because it's so variant. But to be able to deep dive and just enjoy the, you know, like the down to grain, it happens early in the career, I would say.
So for anybody out there who's just getting started or who has fewer years of experience, if you want to have a smile on your face and come present it first, I suggest you take that advice. Let's hear about IR investigations in the age of cloud.
Cool. All right. Hi, everyone. So I'm a principal incident response consultant at WithSecure. You might say, who the hell is WithSecure also? So we were previously called F-Secure. What happened is we decided that it needs to be, our focuses in terms of consumer and business needs to be separated. So we divided into WithSecure and F-Secure. So I work in the WithSecure area. I mainly focus on incident response, readiness, helping other organizations. We also are a research-based consultancy. We're very proud and passionate about researching stuff. So I'm also one of the labs mentor at WithSecure Labs. Most of the blue team content, I try to help people push through it and share it with you guys. I would love to spend more time on research, but I do end up spending a lot of time in service engineering, such as how do we agree in the industry on, let's say, what we call triage, like a person-to-person agreeing this, and just creating a service that any junior person can come into it, and we can train them in a not godly long amount of time. So I'm talked about research. One of the things I've done is CAT scale. Compromise assessment, Linux at scale. So this script is one of the research projects I've done. I recommend looking at it. We run this script generally when we're looking at 500, 1,000 Linux hosts at a compromise assessment. There's a log stash config that's a lot of regexes, and it took I have some white hair building that. Some of the other research we're doing, Chainsaw, I think a lot of people are very familiar, so I work very closely with the guys who built that. We spend, I would say, more than 50% of the time researching new ideas and tools. Not all of these make to you guys, but we're very open. So one of the new things that we're going to be releasing is Detect Tree. It's already up. We're just reviewing the content of the blog. Should be with you. I recommend definitely checking that one out also. So today I'm going to go through a case study. We call this case, I changed the name because anonymity, but we call this case Nuclear Orange. It was very unique in terms of impact, and I'll get into that real quick. After that, we're going to look at the incident response challenges and opportunities in the cloud. And lastly, I'll talk about some readiness strategies, both for responders and organizations that are helping, trying to protect themselves that you can implement. So let's start. I photoshopped that orange in there for your entertainment. I hope you like it. Yeah, centralize your logging, develop trust issues, I think is the subline of this case. So let's talk about client, who they were. They were a startup developing IoT firmware. So they had limited logging and monitoring, which we see most of the startups in that scenario. Their IAM policies were all over the place because they're developing and they're trying to get a product out. They had no MFA, and they had actually a key part of their infrastructure managed by a SaaS vendor. So their technology was AWS, Windows AD. They had the Kubernetes EKS, Elastic Kubernetes Service, I think it's called. That was managed by a third party. And they had Bitbucket and Jenkins set up to automate their pipeline. So this is roughly what it looked like. So the external vendor managed this part of the AWS, although it was in the client's environment. So they had the Jenkins prod and staging. That's a bit of a spoiler, but this Jenkins web portal should have been not public. And they had single sign-on through the Bitbucket accounts. So this authentication was not managed by the client. And client used, obviously, Windows AD, their network, and they accessed AWS as it was theirs. So let's start. So this is what they found one day. They came to realize that, let's go back. I shouldn't have been on a timer. They came back and they realized all of their code was open sourced and including their all AWS keys. So they contacted us and said, hey, we found everything we have is open sourced. We didn't do this, and we're not sure what to do with it. So obviously the things you think about is this an insider threat actor? Because a threat actor who comes outside has all of these. They could have done a lot more, right? So it's a bit of an interesting place to start. So obviously this is a classic scenario of every incident. You will ask things, and you will get 10% or 20% of that. So we asked for VPN logs, because if it's an insider, we want to correlate to who's authenticating into the environment. We asked for CloudTrail, so we can see which account has performed these changes. We wanted to get the snapshot of the cluster AWS, because Jenkins was also part of this. Jenkins compromise is quite common. We asked a third-party vendor at this point, like, is this Jenkins open to the public? They said, it is not, definitely not, I promise you. We're like, okay, if you tell us, we believe you. And then we obviously wanted to look at Bitlog logs also, just to see who's authenticating, because the authentication to Jenkins is through there. And we wanted S3 logs and VPC logs, obviously. And this is what we got. We got the VPN logs and CloudTrail logs, easy. Bitbucket, it was managed by their SaaS provider. So every time we asked logs, we got it in dips and drops, like in drips and drops. Like they'll give us a certain period, and we're like, okay, this is not the incident period, and this looks filtered. Please give us the full period. Next time they give us the full period, but it's still filtered. We can see the data is not the original data. And when it comes to the snapshots were not tagged. So they couldn't tell us what these snapshots were. They're like, these are the snapshots we have. Okay, but how do these snapshots relate to each other? They had no clue. So we're like, okay, we'll have to reverse that. Jenkins applications log doesn't exist. Like they had no clue where these are. We couldn't find them in these snapshots. To me, it's still a puzzle today that they couldn't answer where those logs are. They didn't exist in the snapshots. It wasn't a sidecar. So we don't know where those are. S3 logs, they didn't enable it. They're default disabled. You need to enable in cloud. And VPC logs, same story. They're not enabled by default. So good luck investigating this, right? So look at the CloudTrail logs. We could see something interesting. Hot dogs are sandwiches. Now, this is a good debate. I think we left some people leave over the disagreement. No, I'm joking, they didn't. But obviously, there is a few things interesting about this log entry. If you haven't seen a CloudTrail log entry before, they're mostly JSON. Most cloud vendors actually have it in JSON, which is nice of them. But you could also see SID, Endgame, hot dogs are sandwiches, Jenkins, like bit of a weird mix, really, right? So if you look Endgame or hot dogs are sandwiches online, you will find that there's a tool called Endgame, and it's designed to create backdoors in AWS in one-liner, like one-line commands, instead of running multiple things to backdoor on AWS account. And one of the things about this is the Endgame, I think the guys who built this are also called Endgame. They've actually documented very well how to detect this, how to investigate it, which was very useful, obviously. And it says here, this is the default user agent, which is very common, actually, that 99% of the cases almost, that the threat actors don't change this. They're not reading the documentation. So looking at the CloudTrail logs, now we identified the account that's doing the malicious stuff. The user agent is the same, right? What we're doing is aggregating all the actions that threat actor has taken. Now, if we go back, you'll see here, so let's see, allow current account, put bucket policy. You can see there is a field called event name. So we aggregated these, and you can see there's few of them, like they are very descriptive. Most of them are you're listing, describing images, getting information, but few of them are the ones that we would mostly care about, which is add permissions, grant yourself permissions on things, S3 buckets, which is, you make the S3, bucket public, put key policy, you attach a new KMS key and such. So this is effectively how you aggregate and try to get an overall understanding of what the threat actor is trying to, has done. Again, like I said, the Endgame has amazing documentation. They explain, what you need to be looking for, such as the event name here we're seeing in that log we call. So let's look at the random EOS snapshots, right? So we said we investigated this. So we found out we had to reverse them because they weren't tagged, right? So we have to look at them, okay, identify the operating system that's running, and then figure out how it all connects, right? So we believe these to be this hypervisor data disks. They didn't contain anything relevant because flash news that Kubernetes has 0 logging enabled by default. It's very easy to enable it on AWS. Actually, it's a one line. If you're running it locally, you need to define a config, which makes it a bit more complicated. But again, advantages of the cloud. The vendors, although they are not enabling things by default, it's easy to enable them. So we had one random Windows partition, which is absolutely weird because there shouldn't be any Windows. So we don't know what that was. We couldn't link it to the infrastructure. And then we had the containers, which we believe to be staging and production. Now, we had, with so few information available, we had to get creative, right? So we done some research on Jenkins. We identified a user file created at the time. We're like, okay, this is a bit interesting. Maybe it's the insider creating a new account. And then when we were researching, we realized when you create an account in Jenkins, it creates a username.xml. But this XML is not written to the disk till that user account logs in a second time. It stays in the memory. So that was an absolute rabbit hole that we wasted some time on. But at the end, they were useless. So the lead case, and the person who we're going to actually present this today, Joanny Green, she's not here today, but that was the only picture I had of her. During Christmas, we were putting hats on our profile pictures, so that's still a picture she left me with. But hey, you know what? It's in the cloud. Let's deploy the Jenkins in an isolated environment, and you give us access, right? We don't have evidence to prove theories or disprove them, but let's take the attacker's approach and see how does this look like from the perspective of a user. So what we realized was the vendor made a mistake, and they deployed the config that allowed any Bitbucket account, regardless of the organization or not organization, to log in to the Jenkins account. So when Joanny logged into the Bitbucket with her account, she was like, okay, this is a bit weird. Got up on the call and said to the third-party vendor, okay, so I just logged into this with my account that has no relation to you guys. Can you explain this? And right here is where my trust issues start, because the vendor said, actually, we made a mistake. We haven't told you, but it was public, and we made a config change that left the service in this state. So afterwards, obviously, you have a public Jenkins account with anyone that can log in. Next is quite easy. There's a script. You can Google for it. I think it's from Mohammed M. Saeed. It basically dumps all the creds you have in Jenkins from the script console, which is available. So if you look at the attack path, right, the threat actor finds the public web portal. No application logs, so there's no opportunity for detection there. They single sign-on, config mistake. Come to the Bitbucket, client has no visibility, so they cannot do any detection. The third party, I guess, is not looking at it either. But again, like here, I think is the point I would like to make is, which I'm going to get to, is that keep your logs central, because we could have quickly understood that this threat actor was logging to the Bitbucket because if we had the logs. But this is where we realized the logs were actually why we kept getting drips and drops and why they were being filtered. And now, while I'm not going to name the vendor, this is not a small vendor that should not be doing this. Going further, you run the script console, you get the credential. Boom, now you got the client AWS, you have all the creds, whatever you want to do. You drop the public S3 bucket, dump everything, and there you go. Everything is public, right? So, and we didn't have any S3 logs because they're disabled by default. So you don't even know who has accessed all of your IP and credentials if they have. Cool. So let's talk about some challenges and opportunities like based on this incident, right? So SaaS products, right? So the things that we don't have control of, like in our own premise, on our networks, Windows, there are so many artifacts that are unintentional that are value to us. But with SaaS, we're limited to the logs. And if you're trusting that you're going to get access to your logs instant, I can tell you that 90% of the time, that's not going to be true. It takes time. So it's really critical to centralize those. Like even with the Microsoft 365 and some of the other SaaS products, where they store the data, it's not for analysis. And it takes, on-demand access is not forensically sound. So to dig that deeper, for example, if you do on a busy estate, Microsoft 365 investigation, and you do search, unify, audit, the output of the result is different, and you're limited to 5,000 entries at a time. So if you're doing a big estate investigation, you're a bit shit out of luck. Log extraction may be throttled, so again, you're limited to 5,000. There are ways to around it. If you want to know, come talk to me. Default log retentions, they're not going to be enough. But good thing, the opportunity here is while you're on-prem, it's difficult to enable or centralize these logs. On majority of the SaaS products and cloud vendors, there are multiple ways within single, triple clicks that you can get these logs to somewhere. Not even if you're detecting it, at least you have them accessible to yourself. So a good example is CloudTrail logs. They're on a S3 bucket, right? You can, as long as you have them, you can just pull them down. Microsoft 365, you can put them on a also storage bucket. Let's talk about containers. Scales ups and down, evidence is destroyed. So this is the major issue. This is why you need sidecars, or you actually need to document where your logs are. Logging is not enabled by default. So Kubernetes has, I believe, like 5 components in it. And one of the key logs is the API calls that the controller is making. So if the threat actor compromises Kubernetes, then that's where we would see what they're doing if they're scaling and taking down the infrastructure. Luckily, in this scenario, we didn't need that. Not enough IR documentation. So if you ever end up doing Kubernetes incidents, you're going to realize there is very few use cases or investigations documented online. And it's because we haven't got to that stage where threat actors are done with our on-prems yet. They're still very excited about it. But this is something that as an industry we need to focus on and share. How do you do investigation with containers and what are the best practices? But there are opportunities in the cloud, such as automating snapshots, like using EventBridge. Let's say you had a CloudWatch detection, use EventBridge to immediately take a snapshot and tag that and keep it for a week, or keep it for 2 days. But this is very possible, and this is where security engineering is quite critical. Again, I mentioned it's one line to enable logging on Kubernetes. And there is cloud native log collection agents actually from most of the vendors that you can enable, so the logs are sent somewhere, even if you don't have your EDR. Infrastructure as a service, I think, again, default logging is none, so you need to redo what you have on your premise. Network logging default off, so if you want to capture any network flows, you need to enable it. But wait, some of the vendors, they sample it, and they tell you, at best, we're going to get you 1 out of 10 package, and that's the best case scenario. Cloud native log agents exist. Again, these same agents that you have on the containers you can apply, and automated network log capture is possible. If it's too much, again, using Event Horizon, EventBridge, and CloudWatch, you can automate these things. So although it looks grim, by default, we have opportunities to actually take on challenges that are almost impossible to solve in on-prem, quite easily solvable in cloud. All right, let's talk about some readiness strategies. So if you're a responder in the room, this is what I recommend you do to get ready for a cloud incident. First of all, establish an incident response cloud account. Do not investigate the incident on the compromised cloud account itself. So have we call it outbound, no, what do we call it? Excitement got the best of me. I'll remember that later and cry about it. But what I mean, what we're trying to do here is keep the account outside of the threat actors' reach. Focus on AWS and Azure, I would say right now, because they're more prominent. GCP is the fastest growing cloud, but I think we're still seeing incidents more prevalent in AWS and Azure. The second thing is that build an IR analysis environment. So there is few options here. Considering infrastructure as a service first, which is your virtual machines, EC2s. You can easily do build templates such as like launch templates. I think it's called an EC2. Just build an EC2 VM that you can use with your tools, and you can create a template out of it, and then multiple people can then reuse this. If you have developers in your team who are interested, like we had, you can also write Dreamer, Ansible, and Terraformer, which is code as infrastructure, that on demand you can deploy this, but that's the next level, right? Build templates is super easy to do. Fun, like, if you have not dealt with cloud yet, it's fun exercise. So when it comes to cloud IR analysis also, there is 2 parts to it, right? Artifact analysis, which is why we need this infrastructure to attach disk images, because it's expensive to take disks, a lot of data outside of the cloud. So this is why we're trying to look to analyze it within it, right? Shared snapshots. So artifact parsing, we're trying to do it in the cloud. When it comes to JSON ingestion, so we're talking about CloudTrail, CloudWatch logs, or S3 logs, you can do this locally using your existing tooling. They're mostly in JSON format, so you don't need to immediately consider that when you're building that infrastructure. So this is the third part, right? I think this is an area that we need to all start thinking about. I don't think this is valid yet, but building tooling for active monitoring, right? We're very good at investigating post-compromises, but how are we going to investigate a live attacker in the cloud? How do we keep up to them? Because downloading the logs and monitoring is not enough, and not every client is going to have the budget to deploy Sentinel or the cloud vendor SIM products, right? So I think SANS 509, they have few scripts written, very simple, which is just Python script that downloads the log every X minutes, and then you ingest it to your Elk stack or whatever SIM you're interested in. I recommend learning how to redirect logs on different cloud vendors. So each of them has different options, but almost all of them has option to dump the logs into a bucket, storage bucket, or a S3. So that's definitely the easiest way, and that's the way SANS had been doing it. And then you push the logs to a soft Elk, for example, because they already have the ingestion and configs figured out. If you look at the readiness strategies for businesses, I beg you with all my heart, please centralize your logging. You don't need detection, but at least centralize it. Because the cloud provider log dashboards are not built for security investigation. I don't know if any of you have done Microsoft 365 investigations using their search functionality or scripts. You will realize you cannot do any threat hunts or look at data in long ranges. You have to ingest it into something. Default logging is not enough. Some examples, right? We talked about it. S3 logs, not enabled. System logs, not collected. Application logs, such as Jenkins, not collected by default. Container API logs, disabled by default. NetFlow, disabled. All you have on cloud is your console logs. That's it. It's not going to be enough. And we've seen in this incident, we were lucky that it was in the cloud, and we could stand it up and perform a mini, pen test, get creative. But this is not always possible. Tag and map assets. Don't make your IR vendor reverse engineer your infrastructure during an incident, because that's 7 snapshots. We had to pull 2 resources to cycle through them. Establish a responder accounts. So this is particularly for your vendors to be able to get access to your logs. It's fun and nice to talk to our engineers and tell them, hey, can I get the logs? But then you, most often, like 50% of the log time, the logs do not cover the full scope, right? Even if the people are your own people. But if you have an account that has limited list, describe, or read the logs type of privileges, limited to the, for example, S3 bucket that holds the CloudTrail logs, then they can easily pull that down. You don't need to take any actions. And with that, I believe I have come to end with my presentation. I hope you guys enjoyed that.
Or the beginning of the questions.
It is the beginning of questions. I am more than happy to answer some questions.
We're like right up. You have managed your time remarkably well. Can I endorse you for time management on LinkedIn, that for me?
Please do.
That's great. I really respect that. So, great talk, great speaker. I'm sure we got some questions out here. And remember, questions are redeemable for Belgian pralines afterward, too.
Oh. Hello.
Hi. Great talk. I am a big fan of CatScale, and you're using it a lot. I wanted to ask, in this scenario, if this customer had like proper IAM role that does not allow the actor to open the S3 bucket and expose everything, would that help?
So in this case, the threat actor actually managed to get majority of the credentials from Jenkins. But what we would have done in another scenario is that produce alerts. Like an account getting a lot of denies is a very good sign, right? Suddenly you have a spike of denies in your network if you're monitoring it. In this instance, client was not looking at the CloudTrail log, so they wouldn't see it. Thank you.
Any more questions? Come on now.
Well, if you're excited for other stuff, always happy to chat to you guys. I'll be around today, shooting off later on today, but I'm here till 5 if you guys want to talk about this stuff, or tooling, IR infrastructure, service design. All of these I'm very happy to talk about.
Thank you so much.